Good evening. Good evening and welcome. My name is Crystal Sullivan and I'm the Director of Campus Ministry here at the University of Dayton. I want to welcome you all and thank you for choosing to attend tonight's remembrance. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, is the night which describes the night of November 9th, 1938, when a Nazi-inspired violent rampage in Germany and Austria destroyed Jewish businesses, synagogues, sacred books, and human lives. Kristallnacht is generally viewed as a critical step in furthering of Nazi policy that led to the Shoah, the Holocaust. As we begin, I want to offer a few words about why we're celebrating this remembrance here on this campus in this chapel. There was a time when disdain and fear marked the relationship between Christians and Jews. There was a time when religious hate festered in hearts, motivating violence and discrimination in the name of God. Sadly, that time is not over. In fact, in many ways, the chasms and divisions are getting wider again. But here, in this community, our identity calls us to model something different for the common good. This university's Catholic and Marianist identity is enlivened by diverse people, Jews, Muslims, Christians of many denominations, people of faith and no faith, black, white, brown, queer, rich, poor, and more. In this place, we strive to live God's love together. I extend a heartfelt welcome to guests and friends for whom this may be the first time that you are in this sacred place. And to those guests and friends, especially members of the local Jewish community who are here because they believe in this vision too. Indeed, as we gather, we call one Marianist martyr, Blessed Jacob Gopp, who was killed by Nazis for his vehement denunciation of their regime. He was arrested for assisting two Jewish refugees who turned out to be Gestapo soldiers who were setting him into a trap. Kristallnacht recalls a time in history when there was still time to speak, a dark moment when many did not speak. This remembrance is a summons to vigilance for the human family. It is a moment when people of every race and creed can join together with survivors to say never again to anti-Semitism and to every form of destruction of human dignity. Tonight, we prayerfully remember all who died at Kristallnacht and in the subsequent program of genocide. At least 6 million Jews and over 1 million others lost their lives. We remember so their lives will never be forgotten. And we begin in a moment of silence in memory of them as we light remembrance candles.
I'm Scott Segalowitz, a second-generation Holocaust survivor. Today I want to talk to you about my father's journey, but also provide some context of what was happening during his youth. I also want to share with you some lessons that I've taken away from being a descendant of Holocaust survivors, and a little about why it's so important to continue telling the stories about people of the Holocaust. Please note that during my talk, there'll be some name changes, but the focus is still on the journey of the same person. My father was born Yisrael Segalowicz on February 28, 1936, in Sarny, Poland, a small town of about 11,000 near the east border of Poland. About half the population was Jewish. The former town of Sarny currently lies within the geographical boundaries of Ukraine. He was known by Srolik, which is a common Hebrew name for Israel. 1936 was a leap year, which means Srolik was born just a few hours from having only one birthday every 4 years. Kristallnacht, the day we remember today, November 9th, 1938, Srolik was just 2.5 years old. In 1939, Germany west of Poland and the Soviet Union on the east had a non-aggression agreement that divided Poland. Srolik was 3.5 when Germany attacked Poland and conquered the western and central parts of the country, while the Soviets took over the east, thus beginning World War II. Part of Germany was directly annexed and governed as if it were Germany. The remaining Polish territory, the general government, included many areas with large Jewish populations. For Nazi leadership, the occupation was an extension of the Nazi racial war in Poland, and Poland was to be colonized. Polish citizens were resettled, and Poles who the Nazis deemed to be a threat were arrested and shot. Polish priests and professors were shot. According to historian Richard Evans, if the Poles were second-class citizens in the general government, then the Jews scarcely qualified as human beings at all in the eyes of the German occupiers. Jews were subject to humiliation and brutal violence as their property was destroyed or looted. For the next 2 years, eastern Poland, including Sarny, was under Soviet occupation, and Srolik's father, Shimon, was drafted into the Russian army. During this time, Jews throughout Poland were concentrated in ghettos or sent to work as slave laborers. But the large-scale, systematic murder of Jews did not start until June 1941, when the Germans broke the non-aggression pact with the Soviets and invaded the Soviet-held part of Poland, including Sarny. Srolik was 5.5 years old when his father placed Srolik and his mother on crowded freight trains heading east to escape the Nazi invasion. This was the last time Srolik saw his father. Srolik's train traveled for months heading to Russia. To him, the time seemed to last forever. They were unable to see the difference between day and night unless they had to get off the train when under aerial attacks. Once the attacks ceased, the survivors buried the dead in shallow graves, then returned to the train to resume the journey. They traveled some 1,400 miles deep into Russia to Ufa in the Ural Mountains. During this time in Poland, the Nazis sent special mobile units behind the fighting to kill the Jews in nearby forests or pits. It was also in occupied Poland that the Nazis first experimented with killing Jews using gas vans. Gas vans were hermetically sealed trucks with the engine exhaust diverted to the interior compartment. The use of gas vans began after the soldiers complained of battle fatigue and mental anguish caused by shooting large numbers of women and children. Gassing also proved to be less costly. Mobile killing vans gassed hundreds of thousands of people, mostly Jews, gypsies, and the mentally ill. Within occupied Poland, the Nazis built 6 of the most notorious death camps: Chelmno, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. By 1942, Poland was the focus of the Nazis' first factory-style killing plan. Although by the time the death camps were operational, large numbers of Polish Jews had already been murdered. After several months of travel, Srolik and his mother found themselves in Saratov, Russia, where his mother found work on a farm working for food. As the German army continued to overtake Russia, the attack on Stalingrad, some 500 miles away, prompted Srolik and his mother to get on a cattle train and head further east into Russia. Srolik was 6.5 when he and his mother arrived at a war industry camp, or work camp, in the Ural Mountains. Most of the people in the camp were women, children, and older men. In the camp, Srolik became Shura in an effort to appear more Russian and hide his Judaism. He began to attend Russian school and afterwards performed chores around blocks of their buildings. He didn't know any other Jewish families in the camp, but it seemed like the kids were always picking on him, calling him Zid, or Jew. They beat him up because they knew he was Jewish. The conditions in the camp were harsh. They lived in uninsulated barracks with no heat or electricity. Shura and his mother shared a room with another family of 3, and the 5 of them had 2 straw mattresses and 1 waste bucket between them. They had 1 small window, but the cold winds easily blew through the cracks in the siding. Shura and his mother shared 1 mattress, and the other family shared the remaining mattress. But some of the winter nights were so cold that the 2 families huddled together on 1 mattress and used the other as a blanket. The winters seemed to last forever. Many mornings, the snow was so high that it covered the window. On those mornings, the loudspeakers would wake everyone up a few hours earlier to shovel the snow so they could get to work on time. Being late for work, regardless of the reason, was punishable by reduction in food, or even worse. They did their best to get rid of bed bugs and lice, but each morning they would wake up with more. It soon became impossible to sleep because they knew that the next day would bring more pain, more work, more bugs. All the inhabitants of the building shared a common kitchen to prepare the meals. Shura's mother worked 10 hours every day. In payment, she received a sack of 10 potatoes and a sack of flour every other week. If she exceeded her work quota, she would get a stale loaf of bread for both of them to survive on until the next ration. Shura's mother would collect leaves from plants, roots, or whatever she considered edible, and mix them into pancakes or made them into some sort of soup. Whatever animals there were in the area quickly disappeared, and the occasional rat that ventured into the area was cooked as the greatest of delicacies. Their clothes were old and torn and certainly insufficient for the Russian winters. Occasionally, they were happy to get an article of used clothing, but most of the time it was infested with lice. Shura's mother would boil the clothes in hot water, but it was almost impossible to remain bug-free. Shura wore a pair of shoes with holes in them, and his mother would put newspapers in the soles to keep snow out. Shura had no good memories of his time in the work camp. In May 1945, Germany surrendered, the war industry came to a halt, and the Russian work camps were closed. Srolik and his mother began the months-long trip back to their town of Sarny, catching rides on trains, wagons, and any other means of transportation they could find. During the Nazi occupation of Sarny, they established a ghetto and began the Jewish persecution. By the time Srolik and his mother returned, Sarny, along with most of Poland's once thriving Jewish population, was decimated. Some 14,000 Jews in the region that included Sarny were murdered, including 6 of his mother's siblings, his mother's mother, and dozens of other family members. Before the war, there were approximately 3.4 million Jews in Poland, but after the war, it's estimated that between 40 and 60,000 survived. Srolik and his mother traveled nearly 900 miles to a displaced persons camp in Hallein, Austria. The camp was initially run by the U.S. Army as a safe haven for people looking to emigrate to other countries. In 1945, Srolik was 10 years old when they arrived at the camp, which was a far cry from the conditions of Srolik's youth. Every family had their own room in the barracks, and meals were provided in the mess hall. There was ample food, clothing, medicine, education, and entertainment. Unskilled people attended trade school provided by the Organization for the Distribution of Artisanal and Agricultural Skills, or ORT. ORT was established in Russia in 1880 to provide employable skills for Russia's impoverished Jews. After the war, ORT trained tens of thousands of survivors and displaced persons from Jewish communities throughout Europe. Today, it's a global education network driven by Jewish values, reaching more than 200,000 people a year in more than 30 countries. Srolik's mother became a seamstress, and in addition to attending Hebrew language school, Srolik also learned woodworking, bookbinding, and other useful skills. During their 5 years in the DP camp, Srolik had his bar mitzvah, participated in plays and sports, made friends, and spent a lot of time with his girlfriend, Regina. While at camp, Srolik's mother was able to connect with her two sisters in America. After filing many documents, they were placed on the waiting list to go to the U.S. But the U.S. had immigration quotas for displaced persons, and it took 5 years before they were permitted to go. During that time, Srolik's mother met Aaron, whose wife and family also perished in the war. They married in the camp, and this is the man I always knew as my grandfather. When their time came, Srolik, his mother, and stepfather made their way to Bremerhaven, Germany, where they awaited another 3 months to board a transport ship to America. Srolik was 15 when they settled in Brooklyn, New York, and Srolik's name was Americanized to Ira. He began school knowing no English, but having an affinity for languages, learned quickly. He participated in many activities, met his wife-to-be, Zelda. He joined the U.S. Army and served in Korea as a communications specialist. Upon his return, he attended school, married Zelda, raised 4 sons in the suburbs of New Jersey. Today, he's retired, has 6 grandchildren spread out through the East Coast of the U.S., and remains active volunteering in a synagogue, in the Dayton arts community, as a docent in the Holocaust section of the U.S. Air Force Museum, and traveling. Dad didn't really talk about his journey much until after his mother passed away in the early 1990s. So I never really saw myself growing up as a child of a Holocaust survivor. But the more I learned about my dad's story, the more I realized why some things were so important to him and how I picked up many of his values. Growing up in the first 10 years of his life with his mother as his caretaker and protector, the importance of keeping family close was evident later in our lives. With 4 boys, all close in age, you can imagine that we fought about a lot of things. As I look back, I now realize how it pained him to see us fight. I can also see why we spent many weekends visiting family throughout Brooklyn and Long Island. When Srolik was in the DP camp, somewhere his birth date was recorded incorrectly as February 21st. This became his legal birthday when he came to the U.S., but his mother continued to celebrate on February 28th, knowing this to be the real date of his birth. As we grew up, and to this day, we celebrate both days. This taught us to celebrate everything, to take advantage of bringing as much joy as possible to our daily lives. Not knowing where his next meal was coming from caused Shora to always keep a piece of bread in his pocket during his time in the Russian war camp. It was a hard habit to break when the food was more plentiful in the DP camp, but until he was sure he would not go hungry, he continued to uphold this practice. Growing up, we were taught not to waste food, take what you wanted, but eat everything you take. But this value extended beyond food. He instilled the difference between needs and wants and taught us to appreciate what we had. We also learned that broken items could be repaired rather than discarded. And much to my mother's dismay, saving things because we might be able to use them later. When they moved, it was pretty amazing to see how many motors from various devices, ranging from small toys to washing machines, had accumulated in the basement. But most of all, I learned about self-sufficiency and resilience. Mom and Dad both believed that we needed to be able to do for ourselves. Much to our own dissatisfaction, they were insistent on us learning things like doing laundry and cooking, balancing a checkbook, basic car maintenance, and more. They knew that their job was to teach us to care for and thrive for ourselves, but more than just caring for ourselves, sticking to a project or task to see it through to the end. Don't give up when things get difficult, because they will. Look for solutions and sticking with it at times, difficult, but much more rewarding than giving up and walking away. Dad continues to tell his story to school kids at every chance he can. He's here today, so why is it me up here talking to you and not him? As much as it pains me to think about it, pretty soon there won't be any Holocaust survivors around to tell their stories. So it's up to the next generations to speak for them. Ernest Hemingway said that every man has two deaths, when he's buried in the ground and the last time someone says his name. In some ways, men can be immortal. I think Hemingway took this from Jewish tradition, where Jewish children are often named for their deceased relatives. My Hebrew name, Shimon, is the memory of my father's father who was killed in the war. My daughter Pamela Rose's middle name was from my father's mother, Rachel, or Rose, as she was known in English. And my son Joshua Aaron's middle name is from my father's stepfather, Aaron. So in this way, we continue to recite the names and thus the memories of our ancestors. 2 out of every 3 European Jews were murdered by the Nazis, emptying a continent that was once a center of Jewish life. 8 decades later, the global Jewish population still hasn't recovered and is lower than it was in 1939. Before the Holocaust, there were about 16 million Jews worldwide, over 9 million of them in Europe alone. Today, estimates place the number of Jews globally at about 14 million, with only about 1.3 million remaining in Europe. These are statistics, but they're made up of millions of stories like that of my dad and our family. I believe as difficult as stories such as this are, it's important that we continue to talk about the atrocities of the Holocaust so that the memories of our ancestors become part of who we are. We must continue to honor the memories of both those who perished and those who survived and the sacrifices they made. To paraphrase from one of our Jewish prayers of remembrance, as long as the stories of our ancestors live, we too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. Thank you.
Reading Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God gives me repose in green meadows. God leads me beside the still waters. God revives my spirit. God guides me on the right path, for that is God's nature. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and kindness shall be my portion all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Within the Jewish tradition, it is customary to leave a small stone on someone's grave. This serves as a sign to others that someone has visited the grave, to remember them. It also enables visitors to partake in the mitzvah tradition of commemorating the burial and the deceased. Stones are fitting symbols of the lasting presence of a deceased life and their memory. I invite each person now to come forth and place a stone in the basket near the remembrance candles. Please stand and join me together in prayer. God of peace, we call upon your Spirit to breathe on this fractured world and heal the divisions that grow daily wider. Breathe on leaders that they might respect the right of all human beings to live in peace. Breathe on those who hate, opening the hand clenched in a fist that it might embrace. Breathe on the influential that their power might be used for the common good of all. Breathe on the individual and bring freedom from conflict and a life free from fear. God of peace, breathe on this fractured world. I'd like to thank our colleague and friend Scott Segalowitz for sharing his story and the story of his dad, Ira, and Ira for you being here today and allowing your story to be told, and for us to remember you and your family and friends and others who perished at this terrible time. And to the World Music Choir for offering us some solemn remembrance as well. As a people, we are called by the prophet Micah to act justly, to love with mercy, to walk with humility with God. I ask each of you to seek out ways to take action for justice and change in your life, especially when it comes to overcoming religious hate, in faithful memory of those whose lives were lost at Kristallnacht and beyond. As you depart, I invite you to share with the people around you some sign of peace, starting that moment today. Thank you for being here.